He walked into the toy store with just enough money for one small gift, the last of his savings. What he didn't know was that the woman behind the counter owned everything in sight, and she wasn't just watching a customer, she was watching a man who reminded her what love really looked like. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The November air had a bite to it, a cold that seeped through the seams of old coats and settled deep in the bones. Liam Hale felt it in his hands as he gripped the steering wheel of his beat-up truck, the heater groaning a weak, rattling protest against the frost creeping up the windshield. Beside him, his daughter Maya was a small, vibrant ball of warmth, her breath fogging the glass as she traced invisible patterns with her finger. She was turning 8 tomorrow, a milestone that felt both like a miracle and a weight. He had exactly $47 in his wallet, a crisp 20 and a collection of worn folded singles that represented the last of his earnings from a month of small carpentry jobs that had barely covered the rent. The world was a series of closing doors lately, contracts falling through, clients disappearing, the quiet hum of financial panic, a constant companion in the back of his mind. But Maya didn't know that. To her, the world was still a place of boundless possibility, where birthdays meant magic and her father was a hero who could fix anything. He couldn't bear the thought of that light dimming in her eyes, not yet. So today, they were on a mission. "Are we almost there, Daddy?" she asked, her voice bright with an anticipation that twisted something in his chest. "Almost, sweet pea," he said, forcing a smile. "Just looking for the perfect spot." The perfect spot was a store he could afford, a place that didn't have gleaming plastic displays and prices that would make him flinch. He drove past the big box chains, their windows screaming with advertisements for toys that cost more than his weekly groceries, and turned onto a quieter side street, a forgotten lane of brick-fronted shops with faded awnings, and then he saw it, the Gilded Giraffe. The sign was hand, carved from wood, the letters peeling slightly at the edges. It was a toy store, but not like the ones on the main drag. It looked old, quiet, like a secret whispered between generations. A warm yellow light spilled from its single large window, a beacon in the gray afternoon. He pulled the truck to the curb, the engine shuddering as he turned the key. "This looks like a good place to find some magic," he said, more to himself than to her. Maya's eyes widened as she peered out the window, a genuine spark of wonder replacing her polite patience. This was it. This was where he had to find something, anything, that would keep her believing. He could feel the cold seeping into his worn boots as they crossed the street, Maya's small hand tucked securely in his. The bell above the door chimed a soft, melodic note as they stepped inside, a sound that felt like coming home. The air was warm and smelled of cedar, lemon polish, and old paper. It wasn't the sterile plastic scent of a modern toy warehouse, it was the smell of craftsmanship, of memories. The shelves were made of dark, heavy wood, lined not with loud, branded characters, but with handcrafted treasures. There were stuffed animals with stitched-on button eyes, painted wooden trains, intricate puzzles, and delicate marionettes hanging from the ceiling like silent dancers. For a moment, Liam forgot the weight in his wallet. He just watched Maya, whose face was a mask of pure awe. She moved through the aisles, with a reverence he hadn't seen in her before, her fingers hovering over the toys, as if afraid to break a spell. He followed her, his own calloused hands tracing the smooth, polished grain of a wooden rocking horse. He knew this work. He could feel the hours, the patience, the love that had gone into every piece. This was a world he understood, even if he couldn't afford to be a part of it. A woman stood behind a large, antique wooden counter at the back of the store. She wasn't ringing up sales or barking into a phone. She was polishing a small carved bird with a soft cloth, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked up as they entered, her eyes a startling, clear gray taking them in with a quiet, unreadable curiosity. She wore a simple charcoal sweater and dark jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose, elegant knot. There was a stillness about her, a poise that seemed at odds with the humble surroundings. Liam gave a small, polite nod, and she returned it, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips before she returned to her work. He let Maya explore, his own eyes scanning the shelves for price tags. His hope began to dwindle. Even the smallest items, a set of wooden blocks, a hand-painted spinning top, were priced with a quiet confidence that was well beyond his $47. He felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He shouldn't have come here. This place wasn't for people like him. It was a museum of things he could appreciate but never possess. Just as he was about to gently suggest they try another store, Maya let out a soft gasp. She was standing in a small alcove at the very back, staring up at a high shelf. There, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, sat a music box. It was carved from a single piece of dark cherry wood, polished to a deep, lustrous sheen. On top, a tiny, intricate ballerina stood frozen mid-twirl. "Daddy," Maya whispered, her voice full of a breathless wonder that broke his heart. "Look, she's dancing just for me." Liam stepped closer, his gaze following hers. The music box was exquisite, a masterpiece of woodworking. He could see the precision in the joints, the delicate curve of the ballerina's arms, the almost impossible detail in her tiny face. Then his eyes found the small handwritten tag hanging from a silk cord. $150. The number hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He felt a flush of shame creep up his neck. He had brought his daughter to a place where her biggest birthday dream was hanging just out of reach, and it was entirely his fault. He knelt beside her, forcing his voice to stay light, to stay steady, even as his world felt like it was tilting on its axis. "It's beautiful, sweet pea," he said, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Really beautiful. But maybe we can find something else? Something we can play with right away?" Maya didn't whine or cry. She was too much like her mother for that. Too good at sensing his limits, at protecting him from his own disappointments. She just nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on the ballerina, a single, silent tear tracing a path down her cheek. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered, but the light in her eyes had gone out. And from behind the counter, the woman with the clear gray eyes watched it all, her hands still, the polished bird forgotten on the counter before her. She had seen the hope, the fall, and the quiet, crushing moment of a father's love meeting a world that didn't care. And something inside her, something long dormant and heavily guarded, began to stir. Evelyn Vance had spent her life surrounded by things of immense value, but she had rarely witnessed anything of true worth. She had watched men in bespoke suits trade millions with a handshake, and women adorned in jewels discuss charity galas with empty eyes. Worth, in her world, was a number on a balance sheet, a headline in a financial journal, a cold, hard metric of success. But what she was watching now, this quiet, heartbreaking exchange between a father and his daughter, felt more valuable than anything her company had ever built. She saw the man, Liam, his shoulders slumping just slightly as he tried to shield his daughter from the reality of their situation. She noticed the wear on his flannel shirt, the faint scent of sawdust that clung to him, the way his calloused hands that clearly knew how to build and create, trembled, almost imperceptibly, as he placed a comforting arm around his child. He wasn't ashamed of his poverty, he was ashamed of its consequences, of the simple joy he couldn't provide. She saw the girl, Maya, her small face, a canvas of fleeting hope and profound disappointment. She didn't throw a tantrum or make a scene. Her grief was silent, internal, a testament to a child who had learned too early how to carry the burdens of the adults she loved. It was a look Evelyn recognized. It was the same look she'd worn as a child, standing in the doorway of her father's study, a school art project in her hand, watching him close a deal on the phone, without ever looking up. The feeling of being small, of your heart's desire being dismissed, not with cruelty, but with the cold, unyielding logic of a world that had more important things to consider. She had built this store, the Gilded Giraffe, as an escape from that world. It was her sanctuary, a place filled with the handcrafted wooden toys her grandfather, a carpenter, used to make for her before he passed. It was the only part of her childhood that had felt real, that had smelled of love instead of money. And she had vowed that within these walls no child would ever feel the way she had. Liam was gently guiding Maya toward the front of the store, his voice a low, soothing murmur. He was trying to distract her, pointing out a small, inexpensive kite near the door, but Maya's gaze kept drifting back to the alcove, to the music box. Evelyn took a deep breath, the decision already made. She stepped out from behind the counter, her movements calm and unhurried. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the quiet disappointment in the air. Liam turned, his expression a mixture of surprise and caution. He was bracing for something pity, perhaps, or a polite suggestion that they leave. "I couldn't help but notice your daughter's admiration for the ballerina music box," Evelyn said, walking past them toward the alcove. "I just realized that piece is part of a special promotion we're running this week. An anniversary sale. It was misplaced on that shelf. My apologies." Liam's brow furrowed. "A promotion?" "Yes," Evelyn said, reaching up to the shelf. She carefully lifted the music box, her fingers deftly untying the price tag and slipping it into the pocket of her jeans. She turned back to them, holding the box out. "It's actually marked down quite significantly. It's $45. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions. Liam stared at her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of a lie, any hint of charity. His pride was a palpable thing, a shield he held up against a world that had offered him little else. Evelyn met his gaze without flinching, her expression a careful blend of professional pleasantry and genuine warmth. She wasn't offering a handout, she was correcting a clerical error. That was the story, and she would stick to it. Maya looked from Evelyn to her father, her eyes wide with a fragile, burgeoning hope. "Really?" she whispered. Evelyn smiled down at the little girl. "Really, it seems it was waiting just for you." Liam swallowed hard, the battle between his pride and his daughter's happiness raging within him. He looked at Maya's face, at the trembling smile that was starting to bloom, and the fight was over. He reached into his wallet and slowly, carefully, counted out the money, the crisp 20, the stack of worn singles, every last dollar he had. As he placed the cash on the counter, his rough, work-worn hand brushed against hers. The touch was brief, electric, a silent acknowledgement of the transaction that had just taken place, a transaction that had involved so much more than money. He had given her all he had, and in return she had given him back his daughter's smile. As he walked out of the store, the music box tucked safely in a paper bag and Maya's hand held tightly in his, Liam didn't look back. But Evelyn watched them go, her hand resting on the counter where his had been. From her pocket, she pulled out the tiny, handwritten tag, $150. She closed her fingers around it, the sharp corners pressing into her palm. This man, this stranger, had just paid a price far greater than the one written on the tag. And Evelyn Vance, a woman who had everything, suddenly felt an overwhelming need to understand what it meant to have nothing but love to give. The truck's engine sputtered to life with a reluctant cough, the sound echoing in the quiet street. Liam sat behind the wheel for a long moment, his hands gripping it tightly, his knuckles white. The $47 were gone. The gas tank was nearing empty. The pantry at home was a landscape of desolate shelves. He had just traded their next few meals for a wooden box that played a tinkling melody, and he wasn't sure if that made him a good father or a fool, but then he glanced in the rearview mirror. Maya was in the back seat, the music box open on her lap. She had wound it carefully, and the tiny ballerina was spinning in a slow, graceful circle, the soft, clear notes of the melody filling the cab of the truck. Maya wasn't watching the ballerina. She was watching her own reflection in the small, polished mirror inside the lid, and she was smiling. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy, the kind he hadn't seen on her face in months. It was the smile that looked just like her mother's. And in that moment, all the fear, all the gnawing anxiety about the future receded. The knot in his chest loosened, replaced by a warm, aching gratitude that was almost painful in its intensity. He had made the right choice. He would figure out the rest. He always did. He drove home through the deepening twilight, the melody of the music box, a constant, gentle companion. Back in the toy store, Evelyn stood by the large front window, watching the taillights of Liam's truck disappear around the corner. The store was empty now, the soft lighting casting long shadows across the room. She should have been locking up, heading back to the sterile silence of her penthouse apartment, to a life that was waiting for her on spreadsheets and in boardrooms. But she couldn't move. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass, the handwritten price tag still clutched in her hand. $45. It was a lie, of course, but it was the most honest thing she had done all week. Her life was a fortress built of careful calculations, of strategic alliances, and projected returns. She owned a multinational development corporation, a portfolio of real estate that spanned continents, a name that opened doors others couldn't even find. She had inherited an empire from a father who taught her that sentiment was a liability and trust was a commodity to be leveraged, not given. He had left her everything but the one thing she'd ever wanted, a sense of belonging. This toy store was her rebellion, a quiet act of defiance against the world she was supposed to command. Here, surrounded by the simple, honest work of craftsmen, she could breathe. She could remember her grandfather, a man with sawdust in his hair and kindness in his eyes, a man who had taught her that the value of a thing was not in its price, but in the joy it brought. The man in the flannel shirt, Liam, reminded her of him. There was the same quiet dignity, the same gentle strength, the same hands that knew how to create rather than just acquire. He had walked into her carefully curated world, a world where she controlled everything, and had unknowingly revealed how little control she truly had over the things that mattered. She hadn't just sold him a music box. She had witnessed a moment of profound, sacrificial love, and it had left a crack in the polished facade of her own life. She finally pushed away from the window and walked back to the counter. She placed the crumpled price tag in a small, carved wooden box she kept beneath the register, a box filled with other small, seemingly insignificant mementos. A polished stone, a faded photograph, a pressed flower, things that had no monetary value but were, to her, priceless. She locked the door, the chime of the bell sounding lonely in the empty store. As she stepped out into the cold night air, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It couldn't be. A man who would trade his last dollar for his daughter's happiness was a rare and precious thing. And Evelyn Vance, for the first time in a very long time, felt a pull toward something she couldn't buy, couldn't own, and couldn't control. She felt a pull toward something real. The next few days were a tightrope walk over a canyon of uncertainty. Liam stretched the remaining food in the pantry with the ingenuity of a seasoned survivalist. They had oatmeal for breakfast, peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, and a thin, watery soup for dinner. Maya didn't complain. She was too lost in the world of her music box, which now sat on her bedside table, its melody the first thing she heard in the morning and the last thing at night. She treated it with a gentle reverence, polishing the wood with the sleeve of her sweater and making up stories about the tiny ballerina whom she had named Hope. Liam found a small, one-day job fixing a rickety fence for a neighbor, earning him enough cash to refill the gas tank and buy a carton of eggs. It was a temporary reprieve, a single breath in a marathon of holding it. He spent his evenings in his small workshop in the garage, the air thick with the smell of pine shavings and wood glue, trying to finish a set of custom cabinets for a client who had gone silent, leaving the project and its final payment in limbo. He worked with a fierce, quiet desperation, his calloused hands moving over the wood with a practiced grace. This was the only thing he could control: the joinery, the sanding, the slow emergence of order from a raw piece of lumber. His thoughts, however, were a chaotic jumble. He couldn't stop thinking about the toy store, about the woman with the calm gray eyes. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind. The way she had looked at him, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet understanding. The lie she had told, a lie so graceful and seamless it felt more like a kindness than a deception. Who was she? Why had she done it? He felt a strange mix of gratitude and resentment. He was grateful for Maya's joy, but a part of him, the proud, stubborn part that had been his only armor for so long, bristled at the thought of being a charity case. He told himself it was just a random act of kindness, a store owner trying to make a sale. But he knew deep down it was more than that. He had seen the look in her eyes as she took his money. It wasn't the look of a shopkeeper, it was the look of someone who understood sacrifice. On Saturday, as a cold rain drummed against the garage roof, he made a decision. He took one of the leftover pieces of cherry wood from the cabinet project, the same deep, rich wood as the music box, and began to carve. He didn't have a plan. He just let his hands move, the chisel and knife feeling like extensions of his own thoughts. Slowly, a shape began to emerge from the wood, a small, intricately carved bird, its wings half spread, as if caught in a moment of decision to stay or to fly. It was a thank you. It was a question. It was the only way he knew how to speak without using words. He sanded it until it was as smooth as riverstone, polished it with beeswax until it glowed with a warm inner light, and wrapped it carefully in a piece of soft cloth. He had no idea if he would have the courage to give it to her, but he knew he had to make it. It was a debt he needed to repay, not of money, but of understanding. Evelyn, meanwhile, found herself unable to settle. She returned to her life, to the sleek, minimalist silence of her penthouse, to the endless stream of emails and financial reports that demanded her attention. But the world felt different, filtered through the memory of a dusty toy store and a man's quiet dignity. She found herself distracted in meetings, her mind drifting from discussions of zoning permits and market projections to the image of a little girl's face lighting up with joy. Her COO, a sharp, pragmatic man named David, noticed the shift. "Everything all right, Evelyn?" he asked one afternoon, finding her staring out her office's floor-to-ceiling window at the sprawling city below. "You seem distant." "I'm fine, David," she lied, turning from the window. "Just a lot on my mind." "The Redstone acquisition is a lot on everyone's mind," he said, misinterpreting her distraction. "The board is getting anxious. They need you focused." She nodded, forcing herself to engage, to slip back into the role of the unflappable CEO. But the role felt ill-fitting now, like a coat she had outgrown. The power, the control, the relentless pursuit of Morate, all felt hollow. She kept thinking about the toy store, her small haven of authenticity. She had opened it under a different company name, a subsidiary so small it was a rounding error on her corporate balance sheet. A secret she kept, even from most of her board. It was the one part of her life that was truly hers. And now, a stranger had walked into that secret and made it feel more real, more important, than the entire empire she commanded. She found excuses to visit the store every day, telling her assistant she was checking on inventory, but she wasn't looking at the stock. She was looking at the door, a half-formed hope fluttering in her chest every time the bell chimed. She told herself she was being foolish, that he was just a customer, a fleeting moment. But she couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't finished. She had to see him again. The opportunity came in a way she didn't expect. Her car, a sleek, custom-built electric sedan that was one of her company's own prototypes, began making a strange, subtle noise, a faint humming from the front axle that the dealership's mechanics couldn't diagnose. It was a minor, insignificant issue, but to Evelyn, it felt like an invitation. She remembered the way Liam's hands had looked strong, capable, stained with the honest work of his trade. He fixed things, and she realized, was more broken than she had ever admitted. Armed with a flimsy excuse and a pounding heart, she found the address for his workshop online, a small, independent operation, listed simply as Hale Wood Restoration. It was on the industrial side of town, a world away from the polished streets she knew. And on a crisp Tuesday morning, she drove her six-figure prototype into his gravel driveway, the quiet hum of its engine, a stark contrast to the rattling persistence of his own aging truck parked nearby. She was terrified. She was thrilled. She had no idea what she was doing, only that she had to do it. The workshop was a converted barn, its red paint faded to a soft, dusty rose. The large double doors were open, and from within came the rhythmic sound of a handsaw moving through wood. Evelyn took a deep breath, the scent of sawdust and cold metal filling her lungs, and stepped out of her car. Liam was bent over a large workbench, his back to her, a sliver of wood held steady in a vise. He wore the same kind of flannel shirt, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing strong, capable forearms. The focused intensity of his posture was mesmerizing. He was so completely in his element, a man at peace with his work. She hesitated, her hand clutching the strap of her purse, a sudden wave of doubt washing over her. What was she doing here? This was insane. He would see right through her flimsy excuse about the car. He would think she was some crazy, rich woman looking for a distraction. Just as she was about to retreat, he straightened up, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, and turned. He saw her, and his movements stilled. His eyes, a deep, warm brown she hadn't quite registered in the dim light of the store, widened in surprise. For a long, silent moment, they just stared at each other, across the dusty, sunlit space of the garage. "You?" he said, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. Evelyn offered a small, nervous smile, her carefully prepared speech vanishing from her mind. "Me," she replied, her voice shakier than she intended. "I think my car is broken." Liam's eyes flickered to the futuristic sedan parked in his driveway, a machine that looked like it had landed from another planet and then back to her. A slow, skeptical smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You think so, do you?" He knew. Of course he knew. And in that moment, with the lie exposed before it was even fully told, Evelyn felt a strange sense of relief. The pretense was gone. All that was left was the truth of her being there, a truth she didn't yet have the words for. Liam walked toward her, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his jeans. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze steady, searching. "What's really wrong with the car?" he asked, his tone not accusatory, but genuinely curious. She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "I don't know," she said, the words coming out in a rush of honesty. "Maybe nothing. Maybe I just—" "I had to thank you." He raised an eyebrow. "For what? I'm the one who should be thanking you. Maya hasn't let that music box out of her sight." "For letting me," she said quietly. "For letting me be a part of that moment." His expression softened, the skepticism in his eyes replaced by something else, something deeper. He glanced toward his workbench, where a small, exquisitely carved wooden bird sat, its wings half spread. He picked it up and held it out to her. "I made this for you," he said. "I guess I had to thank you, too." Evelyn took the bird, her fingers brushing against his. It was warm from his touch, impossibly smooth, and it fit perfectly in the palm of her hand. She looked from the bird to his face, and for the first time she wasn't the CEO, and he wasn't the struggling carpenter. They were just two people, standing in a dusty workshop, holding a fragile, unspoken connection between them. The air in the workshop was thick with the scent of pine and the unsaid. Evelyn cradled the wooden bird in her palm, its smooth, polished surface, a stark contrast to the nervous energy humming through her veins. Liam stood before her, his guard still up, but the hard edges had softened. He had invited her in, not with words, but with the offering he'd made, a piece of his craft, a piece of himself. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the delicate carving. "How did you know?" He shrugged, a faint flush rising on his neck. "Know what?" "That I love birds. My grandfather used to carve them for me." A flicker of surprise, of connection passed between them. "He was a carpenter," she added, the admission feeling more personal than any financial statement she'd ever signed. "He said building things with your hands keeps your soul honest." Liam nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "He sounds like a smart man." He motioned toward a pair of dusty stools near the workbench. "You want some coffee?" "I can't promise it's any good, but it's hot." She smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. "I'd love some." The coffee was, as promised, not very good. It was strong, slightly burnt, and served in two mismatched, chipped mugs. But as they sat on the wobbly stools, the quiet hum of the workshop around them, it felt like the most comforting beverage Evelyn had ever had. She told him about her grandfather, about the small workshop behind his house where she'd spent her summers. She didn't mention the rest of her life, the corporate monolith, the suffocating expectations. She just gave him the small, true pieces. He, in turn, told her about his wife, Sarah. He spoke of her laughter, of her love for gardening, of the way she could make even their tiny, rented apartment feel like a palace. He didn't dwell on the illness that had taken her, but the grief was a quiet, constant presence in his voice, a shadow that never fully lifted. "Maya has her smile," he said, his gaze drifting to a framed photo on the wall, a smiling woman with kind eyes, holding a much younger Maya. "I see it every day. It's what keeps me going." As he spoke, Maya herself came bursting through a side door, her backpack bouncing, her face bright with the after-school energy of a child released from captivity. She skidded to a halt when she saw Evelyn, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and delight. "The toy store lady!" she exclaimed, dropping her backpack with a thud. Evelyn's heart gave a lurch. "Hi, Maya." Maya ran to her, throwing her arms around her waist in an uninhibited hug. "You came to our house. Did you see what my daddy made? He's the best wood fixer in the whole world." Liam ran a hand through his hair, a look of fond embarrassment on his face. Evelyn hugged Maya back, breathing in the scent of playground chalk and grape juice. She looked over Maya's head at Liam, a silent question in her eyes. This was his world, his sanctuary, his daughter. Was she intruding? He met her gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture that said, "It's okay. You can stay." And so she did. She stayed for another hour, listening to Maya's rambling, enthusiastic stories about her day. She helped her with her homework at the cluttered workbench, the scent of sawdust, a pleasant, grounding perfume. Liam worked quietly nearby, the rasp of sandpaper, a rhythmic backdrop to their conversation. For the first time, the workshop didn't feel like a place of struggle and desperation. It felt like a home. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the dusty windows in hues of orange and pink, Evelyn knew she had to leave. But the thought of returning to her empty, silent apartment felt like a punishment. "Thank you for the coffee," she said to Liam, her voice soft. "And for this." She held up the wooden bird. "No," he said, his voice equally quiet. "Thank you for reminding me what a little bit of kindness can do." They stood at the door of the workshop, the space between them charged with a fragile, hopeful energy. She wanted to say more, to ask more, but it wasn't time. This connection, whatever it was like one of his woodworking projects. It needed to be built slowly, carefully, with patience and a gentle hand. As she drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror. Liam and Maya were standing in the doorway, waving, and Evelyn Vance, the woman who ran from connection, felt an undeniable urge to turn back. That single visit stretched into a series of them, each one a tentative step across the invisible divide that separated their worlds. Evelyn found more excuses to be on his side of town. A supplier she needed to meet, a route she was exploring for a new project. The lies were thin, and they both knew it, but they served as a necessary scaffolding for the fragile structure they were building. Liam never called her on it. He just started keeping an extra mug clean and the coffee pot full. Their time together was simple, almost mundane. She would sit in the workshop while he worked, the quiet companionship a balm to her overstimulated mind. She learned the difference between the scent of oak and cherry wood. He learned that she had a surprisingly sharp sense of humor and a deep, hidden well of empathy. Maya became the bridge between them. Evelyn would help her with her art projects, her messy glitter and glue creations, a stark contrast to the clean, minimalist aesthetic of Evelyn's own life. They would have tea parties at the workbench with water in the chipped mugs, Maya serving as the gracious host. During one such party, Maya looked up at Evelyn with her serious, old-soul eyes. "Are you and my daddy going to be friends forever?" she asked. Evelyn's breath caught. "I hope so, sweetie," she said, her voice a little tight. Liam, who had been sanding a cabinet door nearby, paused. He looked over at them, a complex emotion in his eyes. He was terrified of letting anyone this close to Maya, to their small, carefully guarded world. But he was more terrified of the silence that would return if Evelyn stopped coming. He had started to look forward to the sound of her car in the driveway, to the low, musical timbre of her voice, to the way the workshop felt less empty when she was in it. He was falling for her, a slow, terrifying, and undeniable descent. One afternoon, she arrived with 2 large bags of groceries. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, the excuse so flimsy it was almost a joke. "I thought you might be out of milk." He didn't argue. He just let her in, and together they cooked dinner in his small, cramped kitchen. It was a clumsy dance of bumped elbows and shared laughter. She had no idea how to work his old, temperamental stove, and he had to rescue the garlic from burning twice. They made a simple meal of pasta and salad, and they ate at his small kitchen table, the one he had built himself. Maya chattered on, but Liam and Evelyn were caught in their own quiet conversation, a dialogue spoken in shared glances and small smiles. After Maya was tucked into bed, the music box playing its gentle lullaby, they sat in the living room, the only light coming from a single dim lamp. "I don't know what this is, Evelyn," Liam said, his voice low. "I don't either," she confessed. "I just know I don't want it to stop." He looked at her, at the way the soft light caught the vulnerability in her eyes. This woman, who could have anything in the world, was sitting in his threadbare armchair, drinking his terrible coffee and looking at him like he was the one with something to offer. He reached out, his calloused hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of the chair. Her skin was soft, smooth, a world away from his own. But in that moment, the contrast didn't matter. The connection was real, a current passing between them that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Stay," he whispered, the word a plea, a promise, a leap of faith. And she did. The line between their 2 worlds began to blur. Evelyn started spending more time at Liam's small house than in her own sprawling penthouse. She learned the quirks of his leaky faucet and the exact spot on the couch that was the most comfortable. He learned that she slept with an extra pillow and hummed off-key when she was concentrating. It was a life of small, shared intimacies, a mosaic of quiet moments that felt more real than anything either of them had known. But the outside world, with its sharp edges and relentless curiosity, was never far away. The first crack in their carefully constructed bubble appeared in the form of a sleek black town car that pulled up to the workshop one afternoon. A man in a tailored suit, David, her COO, stepped out, his face a mask of polite but firm concern. "Evelyn," he said, his eyes flicking from her to Liam, a subtle but unmistakable dismissal in his gaze. "We need you. The Redstone deal is stalling. The board is demanding a meeting." Evelyn's posture stiffened. She introduced Liam, her voice cool and professional, and for the first time Liam saw the other side of her, the CEO, the woman in command. "I'll handle it, David," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. But the interruption had left a chill in the air. Liam felt a familiar unease settle in his gut. He was a carpenter. He fixed broken things. He didn't belong in a world of boardrooms and multi-million-dollar deals. After David left, a tense silence fell between them. "I'm sorry about that," Evelyn said, her voice strained. "It's your life," he said, his tone more guarded than he intended. "I'm just the guy who fixes fences." "That's not what you are to me, and you know it," she said, her eyes flashing with a rare fire. But the seed of doubt had been planted. He saw the way David had looked at him, like he was a temporary diversion, a rustic curiosity. He started to notice other things, the way Evelyn would sometimes take a call and her voice would change, becoming crisp, authoritative, a language he didn't speak. The way she would check the stock market on her phone with a casual intensity that spoke of fortunes won and lost. The big reveal came not with a bang, but with a quiet click of a remote control. They were sitting on the couch one evening, watching a movie, when a local news segment came on. It was a story about urban development, about a controversial new high-rise project downtown. And there she was. A photo of Evelyn, professional and poised, flashed on the screen. The caption beneath it read, "Evelyn Vance, CEO of Vance Development, the firm behind the new tower." Liam froze, the remote slipping from his hand. Vance Development. It was the largest, most powerful, and most ruthless development firm in the state. They were known for buying up entire blocks, for pushing out small businesses, for changing the very face of the city with their gleaming towers of glass and steel. He stared at the screen, at the woman in the photo, and then at the woman sitting beside him, the woman who had helped his daughter with her spelling homework just an hour ago. They were the same person, yet they were strangers. He started, his voice barely a whisper. Evelyn closed her eyes, a look of profound resignation on her face. The secret she had so carefully guarded, the one she had run from, had found them in the mundane glow of the television. "Yes," she said, her voice small. "That's me." The silence in the room was deafening. It was filled with the weight of her lie of omission, with the chasm that had just opened up between them. He wasn't just dating a woman who owned a toy store. He was involved with a billionaire CEO, a titan of an industry that was the very antithesis of his own small, handcrafted world. He looked at his calloused hands, at the worn fabric of his couch, at the life he had built from scraps and love, and he felt a cold, terrifying wave of inadequacy wash over him. He wasn't just out of his league. He was on a different planet. And for the first time, he looked at Evelyn and saw not the woman he was falling in love with, but the world she represented, a world that had no place for a man like him. The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Liam felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Vance Development. The name was a brand, a symbol of corporate power that had bulldozed neighborhoods like the one he grew up in. He had spent his life valuing the small, the handmade, the things that lasted. She spent hers building a disposable world of glass and steel. He stood up from the couch, the movement stiff, and walked to the window, staring out into the dark street. He needed space, air, something to break the claustrophobic feeling in his chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his back still to her. His voice was quiet, devoid of anger, which was somehow worse. It was the voice of a man who was not surprised by disappointment, only weary of it. "I wanted to," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Liam, I wanted to tell you 100 times, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "That I'd ask for money?" "No." She stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "I was afraid you'd look at me exactly the way you're looking at me right now. Like I'm not a person anymore. Like I'm just a name on a building." "You lied to me, Evelyn." "I didn't lie," she pleaded, taking a step toward him. I didn't tell you everything. Because that part of my life, the CEO, the boardrooms, that's not who I am. Not really. The person I am when I'm here, with you, with Maya, that's the real me." "How can I believe that?" he said, his voice raw. "Everything is different now. The toy store, the car, you showing up at my workshop. Was it all just a game? A bored billionaire looking for an authentic experience?" Her face paled, his words hitting her like a slap. "You know that's not true," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Nothing about this has been a game." But the trust between them, so carefully and tentatively built, had been fractured. He saw her now through a different lens, a lens of wealth and power and secrets. Every kindness she had shown him was now suspect. Was the music box a gift or an act of pity? Was her interest in his work genuine, or was she just slumming it? "I think you should go," he said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. Her breath hitched. "Liam, please, don't do this. We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," he said, turning away again. unable to look at the pain on her face. "Our worlds are too different. I can't. I can't live in yours, and you don't belong in mine." He was building a wall, brick by painful brick, and using his pride as the mortar. It was the only defense he had left. He heard her stand there for a long moment, the silence thick with her unshed tears. Then the soft click of the front door opening and closing. She was gone. The house was quiet again, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was a gaping, hollow wound. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands, the scent of her perfume still lingering in the air. A ghost of the life he had, for a brief, beautiful moment, allowed himself to believe he could have. The days that followed were a study in gray. The sky was a perpetual sheet of dull, overcast light, and the mood in the small house mirrored it perfectly. Liam threw himself into his work with a punishing intensity, the workshop becoming a refuge from his own thoughts. He finished the custom cabinets, his hands moving with a precision that belied the chaos in his heart. He planed, he sanded, he stained, trying to lose himself in the familiar rhythms of his craft. But there was no escaping her. Her absence was a physical presence in every room. The wooden bird she'd loved sat on his nightstand, a silent, beautiful accusation. The extra mug in the kitchen cupboard felt like a relic from another life. He found a stray strand of her long, dark hair on a pillow, and the sight of it made his chest ache. Maya felt the shift immediately. She grew quiet, withdrawn. The music box sat on her shelf, untouched, its melody silent. She stopped asking about the toy store lady. She seemed to understand, with the profound, unspoken wisdom of a child who has known loss, that Evelyn was gone. "Is Daddy sad?" she asked him one evening, her small voice barely a whisper as he tucked her into bed. Liam smoothed the hair back from her forehead, his heart clenching. "Daddy's just tired, sweet pea," he lied. "He's just tired." But Maya knew. She patted his hand. "It's okay to be sad." Mommy said sadness is just love, with nowhere to go. The simple, profound truth of her words nearly broke him. He was drowning in love with nowhere to go. Meanwhile, Evelyn returned to her world, but it no longer fit. The penthouse felt cavernous and cold. The board meetings were a blur of meaningless jargon. The Redstone acquisition, the deal that had demanded her return, felt insignificant. She had won, of course. She had closed the deal with her trademark ruthless efficiency. But the victory felt hollow, tasteless. She had the world at her fingertips, but she had lost the only part of it that felt like home. She spent her nights staring out at the city lights, the wooden bird Liam had carved for her held tightly in her hand. She thought about calling him, about driving back to that dusty workshop and begging him to understand. But his words echoed in her mind. "You don't belong in mine." Maybe he was right. Maybe their worlds were fundamentally incompatible. Maybe love, despite what the fairy tales said, couldn't bridge a chasm that wide. She had tried to escape her name, her wealth, her power, only to have it become the very thing that pushed him away. It was the ultimate, cruel irony. She had everything, and because of it, she could have nothing that truly mattered. Both of them were trapped in their own self-imposed prisons, separated by a wall of pride and fear, each believing they were protecting the other, while all they were doing was ensuring their own loneliness. The stalemate might have lasted forever, a quiet, aching standoff between two stubborn hearts. But neither of them had accounted for the fierce, determined love of an 8-year-old girl. Maya missed Evelyn with an ache that was simple and pure. To her, Evelyn wasn't a CEO or a billionaire. She was the lady who laughed at her jokes, who wasn't afraid to get glitter on her nice sweaters, who knew the secret to making the perfect cup of imaginary tea. She saw her father's sadness, the deep, weary lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before Evelyn left. And she decided, with the straightforward logic of a child, that this was a problem that needed fixing. One rainy Saturday, while Liam was out on a rare supply run, Maya sat down at the kitchen table with a piece of construction paper and her box of crayons. She drew a picture. It wasn't a masterpiece. The figures were wobbly. the proportions all wrong, but it was full of heart. On one side, she drew her father standing in his workshop, a sad, squiggly line for a mouth. On the other side, she drew Evelyn, standing in a big, tall building with a frowny face. And in the middle, she drew a bridge, bright and colorful as a rainbow. On the bridge, she drew the three of them, her dad and Evelyn holding hands, all of them smiling. She didn't know Evelyn's address, but she knew where the toy store was. She put on her raincoat and her yellow boots, tucked the drawing into a plastic bag to keep it dry, and slipped out the back door. The walk was longer than she expected, and the rain was cold, but she was on a mission. The toy store was closed, a small sign in the window reading, "Closed for renovations." Maya's heart sank. But she saw a mail slot in the door. Carefully, she pushed the plastic-wrapped drawing through the slot, whispering, "This is for you," to the empty store. The drawing lay on the dusty floor for 2 days until Evelyn, on a whim, decided to visit the store, her sanctuary. She let herself in, the bell chiming into the silence, and saw the small, colorful packet on the floor. She picked it up, her heart pounding as she recognized the childish scrawl. She unfolded the drawing, and the simple, powerful message of it hit her with the force of a physical blow. A bridge. A child's simple, profound solution. Love wasn't about erasing their different worlds, it was about building a bridge between them. At that same moment, Liam was in his workshop, staring at the finished cabinets. The client had finally called, apologized, and paid in full. The money was a relief, a much-needed lifeline. But it didn't fix the hollowness in his chest. He picked up the wooden bird from his nightstand, his thumb tracing its smooth, elegant lines. He had pushed her away out of fear, out of pride. He had assumed her world would destroy his, without ever giving her the chance to prove him wrong. He had been so focused on the chasm between them that he had failed to see that she had been handing him the materials to build a bridge all along. He looked at Maya's empty seat at the workbench, at the lingering traces of glitter, and he knew what he had to do. He had to fight for them. He didn't have a plan, a speech, or any guarantee it would work. But for the first time in a long time, he was going to lead with his heart, not his fear. He grabbed his keys, his mind clear and resolved. He had to find her. Their paths, driven by the same sudden, heart-wrenching clarity, were destined to cross. Liam didn't know where to start. He didn't have her phone number, and he certainly didn't know the address of her penthouse. All he had was a name, Vance Development. He drove his old truck into the heart of the city, a place he usually avoided. The towering skyscrapers felt like monoliths from another civilization, and the roar of the traffic was a jarring contrast to the quiet hum of his workshop. He found the Vance Tower, a gleaming edifice of black glass and steel that seemed to scrape the sky. He parked in a garage that charged more per hour than he made on some days and walked into the lobby. The space was immense, cold, and echoing. The floors were polished marble, the air smelled of money, and a woman with a headset and a practiced smile sat behind a desk that looked like a modern art installation. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes scanning his worn jacket and work boots with a flicker of polite condescension. "I'm here to see Evelyn Vance," Liam said, his voice steady. The receptionist's smile tightened. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," he admitted. "Then I'm afraid Miss Vance is unavailable." "It's important," he pressed. "It's personal." "I'm sure it is," she said, her tone implying the opposite, and she turned her attention back to her computer screen. A dismissal. He was invisible here. Just as he was about to turn away, defeated, another voice cut through the sterile air. "Liam?" He turned. Evelyn was standing by the elevator bank, her briefcase in one hand, her phone in the other. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored pantsuit, the picture of the powerful CEO from the news report. But her face, when she saw him, was stripped of all its corporate armor. It was just her. She looked shocked, vulnerable, hopeful. She walked toward him, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her steps quickening. The receptionist stared, her mouth slightly agape. "Evelyn!" He started, but she cut him off. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and relief. "I was wrong," he said simply, the words raw and honest. "I was scared. I pushed you away because I was afraid of what you represented, not who you are. And I'm so sorry." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden bird. "I never should have let you go." At that exact moment, she reached into her own purse and pulled out a folded piece of construction paper, Maya's drawing. She held it out to him. "She's right," Evelyn whispered, tears shining in her eyes. "We just need to build a bridge." In the vast, opulent lobby of the Vance Tower, surrounded by the symbols of her power and his otherness, they finally met in the middle. He took the drawing, and she took the bird. And the space between them was no longer a chasm. It was the beginning of a foundation. They didn't go back to her office or to his workshop. Instead, they walked out of the gleaming tower and went to a small, crowded diner a few blocks away, a place with cracked vinyl booths and menus sticky with syrup. It was neutral ground, a place where neither of them belonged, and so, together, they did. They sat across from each other, nursing mugs of hot chocolate, the city's frantic energy a world away. There were no more secrets, no more lies of omission. She told him everything. She told him about the crushing loneliness of her childhood, about her father's cold ambition, about the relentless pressure to be a brand instead of a person. She confessed that the toy store was her only connection to a past that felt happy, and that he and Maya had been the first people to make her present feel the same way. He, in turn, confessed his fears. The fear of not being enough, of his simple life being seen as a novelty, of Maya getting hurt in the crossfire of a world he didn't understand. "I saw that woman on the TV," he said, "and I didn't see you. I saw everything I'm not. And it scared the hell out of me." "I'm both, Liam," she said, her hand covering his on the tabletop. "I'm the CEO in the tailored suit, and I'm the woman who gets glitter in her hair. I don't want to choose between them anymore. I want to build a bridge, remember?" He smiled, a real, warm smile that finally reached his eyes. "Maya's a smart kid." "She gets it from her dad," Evelyn said softly. They talked for hours, the hot chocolate growing cold. They didn't solve everything. They knew the path forward would be complicated, a messy navigation of two vastly different lives. The press would still be curious. The board would still be demanding. His financial struggles wouldn't magically disappear, and her corporate responsibilities wouldn't vanish. But for the first time, they were facing it together. They weren't trying to erase their differences, they were learning to embrace them. "So, what now?" he asked as they finally left the diner, stepping back into the crisp city air. She intertwined her fingers with his rough, calloused hand, a comforting anchor in the swirl of the city. "Now," she said, a confident, joyful light in her eyes, "we go home and tell Maya she's a genius. And then we start building." The epilogue of their story was not written in headlines or financial reports. It was written in the quiet, steady work of building a life. They didn't merge their worlds in a grand, dramatic gesture. They built a bridge, piece by piece, with patience, love, and a healthy dose of compromise. Evelyn didn't sell her company, but she changed it. Inspired by Liam's integrity, she launched the Vance Foundation for Artisans, a program that provided grants and workshop spaces for struggling craftspeople. The first recipient, unanimously and anonymously approved by the new board she appointed, was Liam's own Hale Wood Restoration. With the grant, Liam was able to expand his workshop, hire 2 apprentices, and finally take on the projects he'd always dreamed of. He never took a salary from Evelyn's company. His work remained his own, a testament to his independence and skill. But his workshop became a place of community, a hub for local artists, funded by the woman he loved. Evelyn didn't abandon her penthouse, but she spent more and more nights at Liam's small, cozy house, a place that now felt more like home than any marble-floored mansion ever could. She traded her tailored suits for jeans and sweaters, her board meetings for evenings spent helping Maya with her math homework, her corporate galas for quiet dinners in a kitchen that always smelled faintly of sawdust. Maya thrived, caught in the loving cross-current of their two worlds. She had a father who taught her the value of building things with her own two hands, and a stepmother who showed her that strength and kindness could coexist, that you could run an empire and still have time for an imaginary tea party. Their life was a beautiful, messy, and imperfect blend. Sometimes, Evelyn would fly to another continent for a business deal, and Liam and Maya would track her flight on a globe. Sometimes, Liam would have a project deadline, and Evelyn would bring takeout to the workshop, sitting with him late into the night. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after they had found their way back to each other, the three of them were at the toy store. It had been renovated, expanded, a bright, welcoming space with a small workshop in the back where Liam now taught woodworking classes for kids on the weekends. As Liam helped a young boy carve a lopsided boat, and Maya restocked the shelves with a sense of proud ownership, Evelyn stood behind the counter, the same spot where she had first seen them. A family walked in, a father and his young daughter, their clothes a little worn, their faces full of a familiar mixture of hope and worry. The little girl's eyes landed on a beautiful, hand-crafted dollhouse, her face lighting up with a longing that was almost painful to watch. The father saw the price tag, and his shoulders slumped. Evelyn smiled, a warm, knowing smile. She stepped out from behind the counter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft and clear. "I think you'll find that one is on sale." From across the store, Liam caught her eye and smiled. The circle was complete. The bridge was built, and it was strong enough to hold all the love in the world.